Hi everyone, and welcome back to part 6, the final part of this week's lecture series on erotic art. In this section, I'm going to be mostly focusing on depictions of that animalistic aggression and of mythological figures who are part animal and their representations in erotic art of the ancient world. But I would be remiss before I moved on from the female body and representations of female sexuality if I did not return really quickly and just bring you to Pompeii and to one of its most famous landmarks and most popular tourist attractions, the lupanar or the brothel. So this is what it looks like from the outside. And prostitution is definitely in the Roman and Greek period a career. So women who become prostitutes are not proper society women. They are removed from the sort of social obligations placed on women of proper high status. And instead, they are able to take on more masculine characteristics, like we've seen with our hetairai, with their levels of education and musical prowess. With prostitutes in the Roman world, they are the only women who are allowed to wear the toga, the civic male garment, because they are not proper women. They do not adhere to the proper roles of women. They're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to be involved in a lot of religious sacrifices, for example. There are a lot of social activities that actually explicitly exclude people like actors and prostitutes who are considered to be in these sort of low-class professions. But prostitution is a big deal in the economic system of the ancient Roman world. And so in Pompeii, we see this brothel, this lupanar, which is a two-story structure. And as you go inside, there's all these little cubicles built up in masonry. And they are little bed-shaped cubicles. They all have little masonry beds in them, which you would, in antiquity, if you were to visit this brothel, there would probably be some fabric, some cushioning on here to make it a more comfortable place. But it is grim. It is a grim environment. It's not with a lot of breathable air and light and nice paintings. What we do see in terms of decoration in the brothel are some of the most famous paintings from Pompeii, which are these interesting brothel menu type paintings. Each little cubicle and sort of around the outside of these rooms has these sets of little erotic couplings. Here we see two women and a man. We see a man and a woman here, man and woman, engaged in various forms of sexual encounter in various sexual positions. And some people have interpreted these as a kind of like a menu to choose from. So you go to the brothel and you say, I would like someone to go into position number 3 with me. Other scholars may think that perhaps this is just a sort of visual aid, right, to get you in the mood, akin to the sort of magazines you might find in a sperm donor bank or something similar to that. There are a lot of interpretations, but this overt sexual imagery really does show up in this brothel context, in addition to the other contexts that we've been talking about so far. Another thing that you might find in an area like the brothel would be an erotic lamp. So with these little Roman oil lamps, here you can see the fill hole. The nozzle is outside of the picture in this lamp where the flame would actually be. But you can see an erotic coupling. And you have to imagine that with a lamp or an object like this, the light coming out of the nozzle is going to be this little flickering flame. And it's actually going to sort of cast raking shadows onto the discus where the image is, and perhaps even make it look like it's moving, right, as the light is moving, to kind of give it a flickering animated effect to whatever is going on the discus. So when we see erotic lamps, you might be able to imagine what that sort of effect would be, with a raking flame always kind of moving across the surface here. And think a little bit about what it means to have your sort of daily life object like a lamp, something that is pretty anodyne and not noticeable, actually have this kind of erotic decoration on it. It's a little bit different, I think, than a lot of the household decorations that we have nowadays. So, to move into our sexy beast discussion here, after the Amanda Herring article that I gave you to read for this week, we notice in a lot of Greek and Roman images that we find these satyr menad couplings, where we have our half goat, half man satyr, often recognizable by their tail, their pointy ears, their beard and mustache combination, which becomes pretty standardized as part of the iconography here. And then of course, the erect phallus as well. So satyrs and maenads are both sexualized. The women are sexualized and the men are sexualized in this case. Usually maenads are resisting in some way. Here you have her arm up in sort of a gesture of warding him off as he's reaching out to take hold of her. And in a lot of cases, we see that the idea of sex as a transformative activity with satyrs really expressed through this animalistic, uncontrolled lust. So the idea that they are sort of not fully in their minds, they don't have that sort of nomos, the law, the cultural law, the ability to hold back from immediate desires that a proper Greek or Roman citizen would have. So satyrs really become emblematic of that sort of loss of control and giving in to your more lustful desires. Later on in the Hellenistic and Roman periods, we see items such as our Barberini faun, the subject of the Amanda Herring article, the Sexy Beast article, which challenges a little bit that unbridled lust animalistic image, and instead focuses a little bit more on the sensuality of the image of a faun or a satyr in this case. He looks very human compared to what we see in our red figure here. There isn't a lot of indication of tail or of hoofs, for example. Instead, we have more of a focus on that restful pose, that relaxed pose that we see a lot in the Hellenistic period, on the sort of sensuality of the face. His eyes are closed, but his legs are spread wide apart, which turns the viewer into quite the voyeur. Watching this sleeping eroticized figure on his rock here. So our Barberini faun is an example of the way that in the Hellenistic period, as attitudes towards sex changed a little bit from being focused on the sort of societal obligations, fitting your social role, behaving in a way that is proper to your status, to more of an emphasis in the visual and in the literary realm on thinking about individualized relationships, individualized erotic encounters, and less focus on the sort of legal aspects of marriage and sexuality and how they fit into society. So sort of a generalization, but that tends to be the ideas that Amanda Herring sets out in her article here. If we look at another example, we also see satyrs not only in erotic couplings with maenads, but also with erotic couplings with young men, particularly shepherds. So this relates to the ideas that we were discussing last week about the danger of the natural world, or the potential danger of the natural world. So if we have our god Pan or Faunus here, depending on if we're speaking like a Greek or a Roman, and a shepherd boy, that sort of represents both the wild, uncultivated side of the natural world and the pastoral, more cultivated side of the natural world meeting in an erotic conflict, right? So there is a relationship there between these two spheres, one that can be very pleasurable, but can also be dangerous. And the satyrs and fauns are really represented as completely uncaring about things like sex or gender. They are just totally lustful and sexed up. It does not matter what the object of their desire is. So we see also these same kinds of images used in more humorous contexts. I've showed you this one, I think, in a previous lecture. Here we have a little red figure, Amphreta here, and a herm with a particularly emphatically sized phallus attached to it, getting sort of a kiss from a bird that has a lit on the end of this, looks like a tree branch, right? So that's just calling back on these ideas of erotic imagery playing a role, as we see, for example, in the Pompeian brothel, as a mood setter, as something to actually evoke erotic feelings in the viewer, as an indicator of perhaps the danger of the erotic world, maybe in our conflicts between our satyrs and maenads, or our lapiths and our centaurs that we saw in the Olympian pediment. And then also as a way of expressing humor, right? So sex can be funny, even in the ancient world, and definitely there is some interest in representing the kind of humorous, lighthearted side of the sexual realm as well. One last thing that I want to show you, and if you have time to really look at this work closely, I would recommend it because there's a lot going on. It's a really rich iconographic set of materials to work with. This is a sarcophagus from Pompeii with a bacchanalian scene. Actually, I don't think it's from Pompeii. It's in the Naples Archaeological Museum. And we see, again, our satyrs here interacting with one another, interacting with the various humans and maenads in this scene. The part that I want to sort of look at more closely, there's two here, demonstrates again, that interest in sort of overabundant sexuality. Here we have a satyr who is using a herm, using a statue of a herm, holding on to something at the top of the head here, and inserting the phallus of the herm into himself. So we have a really interesting interaction going on here between the sort of unbridled sexuality of the dangerous natural world, the satyr world, meeting with the herms, so the sort of sacred aspect of the sexual realm and fertility symbols and symbols of safety and protection. We have those two images really meeting here and coming into contact with one another in a way that is a little bit surprising, right? So you have this sort of inanimate object to our eyes and to Roman eyes as well. That would be, you know, not a normal sexual behavior, right? To find a statue in the wild and go after it. But we also have this sort of interest in using death, the space of funerary iconography to explore these ideas of sexuality yet again. So we've seen that before in our Etruscan tombs, even like the tomb that shows Achilles, the tomb of the bulls. So I just wanted to sort of leave you with that image, leave you with the image of a satyr and a herm together. Here we have two satyrs as well. So there is, you know, no selectivity really here going on in the sexual appetites. It is just about giving in to those appetites. So using the animal realm is a way for the Greeks and Romans to kind of take those uncomfortable sexual ideas about loss of control, about desire that is all-consuming and that can kind of control your behavior and make you act in a way that is less than civilized or less than human, less than controlled. That anxiety really gets displaced into this mythological realm, as you'll see in some of the pictures that you're looking at more closely for your little project this week. That shows up there as well. So a way of using not quite humans to show the uncomfortable sides of human behavior. This is another theme that we've come across multiple times before. So just to clean up and end here, I want to leave you with this wonderful modern photograph of the cast collection at the Museum of Archaeology in Cambridge by David Hearn. This is called from a series called Sculpture Exposed. And here we see a cast of the Barberini faun sleeping and exposing himself to us, looked at by our Venus of Milo and Crouching Aphrodite here. So they're sort of looking at his body. And I think that if you read the David Frederick article for today, this is a really interesting thing to kind of think about those ideas of voyeurism, about the ideas of how sex is occasionally, in some contexts, used to represent poor behaviors or punishments or what happens when things go wrong. That idea here is kind of turned on its head. We see, rather than vulnerable women about to be destroyed for their lustful desires, we see these same classical statues looking at the masculine sexualized image here, which I think is kind of an interesting place to leave you. So the last thing that I want you to do for your assignment, looks like I forgot to pick the slide, so I just screenshotted it here. What I want you to do is to reflect on the following questions and respond in 3 to 4 sentences. So the first is, that's total, not each. The first is, in what respects does your chosen image, the image you chose in part 1, is it erotic? Is it explicit or more sensual? And what do you make of the interest in sexuality, eroticism, and non-sexual nudity in ancient art? So just kind of wrap up your thinking about these ideas, spend some time with the image that you chose and really get to know it. And see what comes out of the thinking process as you are really looking at a particular image. How do your general ideas and general impressions of this topic change? Thank you very much. I am looking forward to next week and reading your assignments, and I hope you are all doing very well.